We're going to be joined by News Central correspondent Bernard Akede, who's going to be joining me live now from New York, where he is following details of the event. Bernard, it's good to see you this afternoon here in Lagos. Please, would you give us details, as we've just seen the Brazilian president give his speech, first of many, and we're hoping that there's more and that you have other details that we need to know about the event.
All right, Mazino, thank you so much for having me. But I'll say good morning from over here. And yes, it is the beginning of the high-level conversations at the United Nations General Assembly, the 80th United Nations General Assembly. First of all, that will give you a sense of belonging and an idea of how far the United Nations has come and how much is expected of the United Nations after 80 years. Fela Anikulapo Kuti sang and said, "Waiting united about United Nations." And I think it's about time we began to ask that question, as a matter of fact. There are those who believe that this will be another talk shop, and there are those who hope and feel that policies will actually change from this conversation. Before going into what the president of Brazil had said, who was the first world leader to speak at this year's high-level conversation, I'd like to jump into the Power Pact, and I dare say so myself, Power Pact introductory speech by António Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, current Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, he hammered on certain things that I think we should take away this morning. First of all, he warned largely about global crisis. That's one. Two, Guterres talked about peace and conflict largely. I'm just picking them bullet point by bullet point. He also talked about human rights and gender equality. Basically, the things he touched on are most likely what will be shaping the conversations at this year's UN General Assembly. Now, besides that, he also talked about multilateralism and cooperation versus division. He also hammered on accountability and the UN's effectiveness. Now, this particular number 5, which I picked, I think is one that a lot of world leaders and global commentators are beginning to talk about. How effective is the United Nations so far? We're beginning to see countries go to war against other countries. We're beginning to see some countries stand up for what people believe is just and right, and others just folding their arms. Recently, we saw some countries publicly accept the Palestinian state, which Guterres also talked about, and we're seeing other countries condemn that particular action. So this is also what he spoke about. And then wrapping up the highlights, he eventually did equally hammer largely on Israel and Palestinian conflict, not forgetting, of course, Russia and Ukraine. Now, besides all of that, Mazino, there was a point where the Secretary General also hammered largely on AI and technology, talking about the world taking advantage of technology as it were right now, but particularly supporting, would I say third world countries? I don't like using that term, but I'd rather say developing countries as regards developed countries, saying that countries should not just be consumers of AI and technology, they should also be producers of AI and technology. Unfortunately, we know what the rhetoric is when you come to developing country. Now, if you unpack all of this that he's talked about, of course, including the SDGs that most countries are chasing and targeting for 2030, this more often than not, or most likely, would generally encapsulate everything that most of the world leaders are going to be talking about in the next few days. And I think, without even speaking too much, this is also part of what the Brazilian president spoke about as well. There's going to be COP30 held in Brazil. We're talking about climate change. Remember again that the developing countries largely are the ones feeling the brunt of climate change so much, whereas they are the ones who are contributing the least to climate change. Last year there were conversations as to compensations from the more developed countries to the developing countries in terms of climate change, in terms of exploitation, and several other topics. It's beginning to look like we're going to have the same conversations this year. So the big question is, will we still just have conversations, or will those conversations eventually be turned into actions? Mazino?
Well, thank you very much for highlighting the UN Secretary General António Guterres' expressions there at UNGA 80. And also, good one there about Brazilian president, and well, he's always been known as the voice for the global south, and there he's pressing on for the Brazilian inclusion when it comes to UNGA and development for Brazil. But then again, we also have the Nigerian delegation. The vice president is there. I'm wondering what we should be expecting that the vice president will be speaking on, and how it intersects with the different world leaders that will be telling what their nations would be needing here at UNGA 80. So what do you think we should expect from our Nigerian representation?
All right, Mazino, I'm going to put on my wizard's hat and I'll try to be a fortune teller. But I'll do this based on scientific prediction, and that's based off of what was discussed last year. Last year, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima, first of all, spoke about debt relief. We know that the developing countries of the world are owing a lot of money to the developed world. He spoke about debt relief, which was not unique to Nigeria alone. Several other African leaders also spoke about that. He spoke about support when it comes to fighting insurgency and insecurity, particularly taking control of the Sahel region, which has been an issue for Nigeria and many other West African countries. Of course, there was also the conversations surrounding the SDGs, and supporting women and children, concerning hunger as well, concerning AI, artificial intelligence, which I expect that a huge chunk of this year's conversation, not just for Africa, but for other world leaders, would definitely have parts of that in there. He also spoke about education. He spoke about clean water and sanitation in Africa and, of course, in Nigeria as well. He spoke about bilateral trade and communication and several other things. But most importantly, like many other African leaders, and like you and I discussed yesterday, Mazino, he spoke about the inclusion of Africa, Africa having a permanent seat at the Security Council of the United Nations. Now, of all these conversations, of course, having a permanent seat at the Security Council, I think once again will be top burner when it comes to the conversations that we will expect from Nigeria's Vice President and several African leaders. Is Nigeria, or rather, let me start from this place, is Africa ready to take a place at to take a permanent seat at the Security Council? And if truly Africa is ready, which African country or countries will be given that seat at the Security Council? That permanent seat, I must add. So I think, judging from what was discussed last year, these are some of the conversations that I'll be expecting to hear from Nigeria's Vice President and ultimately from many of the African leaders that will be speaking this year at the UN General Assembly. Again, there may be more to come from Nigeria and other African leaders, but I honestly do believe, if you ask me, that this is where I'll put my money.
Well, what a wizard hat you have. Thank you very much, Bernard. It's not much wizardry than it is statistics, judging from what we had from last year and what we should expect from what Nigeria absolutely needs. And I'm sure that our Vice President will be doing us justice there. Thank you very much, Bernard. Let me let you go about your business there at UNGA 80 as we expect to hear more details from you. We'll be following the developments.